I'm honored to introduce Dr. Stephen Farmer, professor of chemistry at Sonoma State University and author of the book, Strange Chemistry, Stories Your Chemistry Teacher Wouldn't Tell You. Um, Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it, and I'm hoping you'll be able to tell us at least one of those stories. So pass it over to you, Dr. Farmer.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I always enjoy the opportunity to talk to groups and just to expand. Just to give just a brief introduction in terms of why do I do these talks? It goes back to my own experience in terms of how did I become a chemist. And a lot of people ask me that, and I always warn that I kind of had a rocky road in terms of my college career and becoming a chemist. That a lot of the times people expect I always knew I was going to be a chemist sort of story, and that absolutely did not happen. In fact, I didn't know I was going to go to college or have a college degree until I had already graduated high school. So just to start off, I'm a first generation college student. So I am the first person in my family to get a college degree and the first person of pretty much everybody I know growing up to get a graduate degree. So it was kind of an interesting road. But I'm here to tell you that you can do it. It just takes persistence. And no matter where you start off, it's a matter of imagining the goal. It's a matter of, deciding where you want to get to get there. And the overall idea is, in terms of me getting a PhD, when I started college, I didn't think I was going to get a PhD. Worry about the next step. So for you guys right now, worry about graduating from high school and start thinking about the next step. And when you get to college, worry about finishing college and then think about the next step. And you don't look at the whole path because it can be kind of large. You try to look at one individual step. So in particular, I didn't really, honestly, I'll tell you, my dad pulled me aside when I was about 14, come from a very working class family. The family business was in appliances. My dad pulled me over when I was about 14 and he said, hey, look, you're not going to go to college unless you can do it on your own in terms of scholarships. And I said, well, I guess I'm not going to college. So and that was fine because we had a family business that I fully expected to become involved in. And then kind of magically over the next 4 or 5 years, my dad was a very shrewd businessman and got in on kind of the real estate market in California, that all of a sudden the ability to go to college was there. And I'm very sad to say my dad had to bribe me to go to college at that point. I absolutely didn't see where college was going to be anything. And my dad understood that. And he literally begged me to go to college, which I'm very ashamed to say that I was that stubborn. Kind of a funny story that I actually said no to him in the beginning, and he put me to work, and I was the first job I did during the summer, right after I graduated from high school, is I was putting metal roofing onto a house, and we were working there in a day that it was 103, and I was nailing roofing on, and I started to get dizzy and I started to get tunnel vision that I'd been working in the sun so much that I was starting to get like a heat exposure. And the guy I was working with said, you need to go sit in the shade. And we were walking on top of refrigerators. So I was kind of high up and I was walking and a joist hit me in the head. I didn't even see it. And so the guy gave me a bottle of water and said, you need to sit in the shade and, until you feel better. And when I was sitting in the shade, kind of the clouds parted and I saw the utility of going to college. That's really what it is. And this is what my father saw, is it gets away from using your hands for a living. And that kind of convinced me that I didn't want to be nailing roofing onto a building in 103-degree weather my whole life. And that's kind of what you're looking at if you don't go to college, is you're going to be doing some kind of manual labor that doesn't use your brain most of the rest of your life. So there's really is something there. The other thing I recommend, and where I was a little bit different, when I went to college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. My parents were just like, go to college. And there's this big push to try to get out of college in 4 years, which sounds, which is okay. You want to move on with your life, but in order to get out in 4 years, you need to pick a major before you go in. And it's really hard to understand, what are you meant to, what are you excited by? What are you meant to do? And trust me, you don't know any of the sciences or any of the classes you've taken. I mean, you've been introduced to them, but until you take college level courses, you really don't see the dynamic of what you're doing. And I'm very, very lucky that I started off at the community college. So I lived at home and I went to community college full time. The tuition was very, very cheap. And my parents were like, hey, go as long as you want, just as long as you keep your grades up. And so I just started taking classes kind of a roundabout way, started taking classes. In the beginning, I started off in psychology, and it was kind of a interesting story that I never thought I was going to be a chemist. I've always had trouble with mathematics and science. They were always my worst courses. And then I had kind of this one magical class that I took a pre-calculus class with easily the best professor out of probably the 70 or so college professors that I had. And the guy was just absolutely fantastic. He taught me that I actually am quite good at mathematics. And in that sense, I'm quite good at science. And that was kind of a turning point in my life that I never had thought about sciences, and I was doing very well. I seemed to have an aptitude for it such that it's separated me out from other people. Other people were having a hard time with these, and it was coming to me quite easily. So I ended up kind of staying at the community college even longer to take some science courses. I said, I should explore this. And once I took some chemistry, and more importantly, I took organic chemistry, it was over. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And I was only able to find out that I really wanted to be an organic chemist. So that's chemistry that focuses on organic molecules in themselves. I only knew that after I took that class. If I never took that class, I would have never understood that that's what I wanted to do. So it was me taking this variety of courses that I really found my calling on what I was supposed to do, and found my interest, and found the subject that I'm very, very passionate about. So don't be afraid to do that. For me, as being first generation, I had no idea what college was about or what I wanted to do. Taking these series of classes, I literally would sit with the catalog and just go, that looks like an interesting class, I'm going to take it. And sometimes I did good, sometimes I did bad. So I'll tell you, I was a 7-year bachelor's degree. I spent 5 years at the community college, but when I left, I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I was like, I want to be an organic chemist. So when I transferred to a 4-year college, I only had to stay there 2 years. So it didn't really cost my parents that much money. If you go through the community college system, a college degree is, it costs money, but it's not that bad. And after that, I just, went from there. So I got my bachelor's degree at UC Davis. I went and got a master's degree at Sonoma State. I went back to UC Davis to get my PhD. And, that's a whole other story too, in terms of, going to graduate school and things like that. But really what I like to do, and this is what I'm going to be showing you guys here in a second, is I try to make chemistry accessible. So I'm very passionate about chemistry. The things that I see, excite me, and I try to share that excitement with other people. And as soon as people, typically when you start talking about science and chemistry in particular, the people shut down. They hear the word chemistry and they think this is a really hard subject and it's very dry and boring, and that cannot be further from the truth. And not to pitch my book too bad, but if you read that, I wrote a whole book about the craziest ways that chemistry has shown up inside of life. And it's just absolutely, mind-boggling the ways that chemistry can show up. And with a basic understanding of chemistry, you understand so much about how the world works, including, poisons, illicit drugs, explosives, and just every other part of your life. And you start seeing the world in a different way. So that's what I do here, and that's what I'm going to share with you. Some of the things that I see that excite me, and then I try to show it to other people to basically say, you know, chemistry is exciting, and more importantly, and this is, you know, the other reason why I do it is just to say, you know, science and especially chemistry is a viable option for you guys. That's something I didn't get in high school. Honestly, I didn't understand that some of these classes I was taking are actually a gateway to a career, a possible career. When I took chemistry, I thought it was just some kind of class that they, you know, a general education. No, you can go and spend your whole career as a chemist. So that's something that I wanted to share, that's, you know, a viable option, and that you can do it, even though it seems, at least in the beginning, to be kind of foreign. You know, you work your way up to it. And when you take it, it's, you know, it really kind of exposes you to the entire world. So that's kind of the, you know, the final thing is, don't count chemistry out or the sciences. You don't really know until you've taken one, and don't be afraid to try it. If you take it and you don't like it, or, you know, you're excited by something, that's fine. Everybody has to find their own path. But, you know, you should at least give yourself a chance at it. So you, like I said, you don't really know until you've actually taken the class and have tried it. You may be the best physicist, mathematician, chemist in the world, but you don't know that until you're exposed to it. So don't be afraid to try it, and try it at a college level. So for me, as a first generation student, I highly recommend going to community college first and taking some time and trying different classes and trying different fields, and then kind of finding your way. Once you pitch that, then you're going to have to take some lower division classes. So what I brought today, so I sent out a video. I'm going to be talking about fluorescence. And most people have heard this term. You might have heard of a color called fluorescent orange, or you might have heard of fluorescent lighting. So it's all kind of the same basic idea. It's just a simple principle that we have in chemistry. And like I was saying, if you just basically understand one principle, it allows you to understand a bunch of different things that go on inside of your life. And for me, I always wondered, you know, I have this, and you've kind of seen things like this or like this, where you have this orange color that's very, very bright. It's kind of this unusual brightness. And for me, as a chemist, I'm very curious about those kinds of things. I wanted to know why, and it was kind of funny to me. And this is why I titled my book, you know, the stories your chemistry teacher wouldn't tell you, which sounds kind of bad. But my point is that when people teach chemistry, they tend to focus on the actual material. They don't take time out to talk about some of the fun stuff. And with me, I didn't understand this idea. Why does this look so unusually bright? I didn't understand that until actually after I had a PhD, and I just read it in passing. And I'm like, oh, wow, it totally makes sense. And then it explains so many other things that I know about. That there's this big push to, you know, explain chemistry, but they don't take a second out and talk about how fun and versatile it is. So I take that opportunity. So with fluorescence, so this is fluorescent orange. Fluorescence is just a basic chemical process. All it does is it takes one type of light in. So these molecules absorb one type of light and emit a different type of light. And so with the things that I'm going to be showing you today, it's absorbing ultraviolet light, and then it's emitting visible light. So the idea is ultraviolet light is, you can't see it. It's not part of the visible spectrum. Ultraviolet light we can't see, not part of the visible spectrum, but we're turning it into visible light. So overall, why these things look so bright is it's actually emitting more visible light than it's absorbing. So even here under this lighting that I have now, there's a little bit of ultraviolet light in there, not enough to cause a sunburn, but it's taking that little bit of ultraviolet light and turning it into visible light. And that's why it appears it's literally emitting more visible light than it's absorbing, because it's adding on the light that is gaining from the UV light. So that idea explains a lot. So just some organic molecules turn ultraviolet light into visible light. And that one basic idea explains so much inside of our world in terms of the things that we see. So with this, kind of the basic one, so explains this. Another one, it was kind of in the video, and I hope I got the right one. So I think this has got fluorescent dyes in it. The other one is white cloth, and this is something else that most people don't understand, that white cloth actually has a chemical inside of it that makes it white. So it's called an optical brightener or an optical whitener. So when we do this, and fortunately I have a piece of paper too. So paper also has an organic molecule in there. So when you look at these things and you see that it's white, it's very common to think, well, they bleached it. And so they took the cotton or the cellulose, and then they refined it, and then they bleached it, and that's why it's so white. That's not true. Without the optical brightener, these two things would appear kind of a dingy yellow color. And so what they do is they put a fluorescent molecule that fluoresces blue. So it absorbs ultraviolet light and it emits blue light. And when it does that, the blue light mixes with the yellow color that's inside of there, and yellow and blue makes white. So it's the yellow colors are still inside of there. They're just being masked by the blue color from the molecule. And if you've ever noticed this, white paper actually appears quite bright. It has the same effect as the fluorescent orange. When you look at it, it kind of hurts your eyes. And actually I started, when I print out exams, I put them on different color paper, because when I would grade, I would stare at white paper so much it would hurt my eyes. And it's because this is emitting more visible light than it's absorbing. So when I turn on my black light here in a second, when we see these things, you're going to see it's going to kind of glow a blue color. So what I want to show, and this is the idea as a chemist, I talk about these things. We want to be able to prove it. So the idea is, what I'm going to show is a black light. So I'm going to turn off the lights. A black light is just a fluorescent bulb that has a coating on it that gets rid of all the visible wavelength, and it lets through a little purple color, and then whatever ultraviolet light is left over. So it's completely safe, but things that fluoresce will glow a certain color, and then things that don't fluoresce kind of glow a very dull purple color. So the idea is this fluorescence is going to come out. So this is a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. So you can get a black light for maybe $20, and I've had more fun than anything else. So just to show you a couple other things before we turn on the light, there's quite a few natural species. So like tennis balls is another one that I always bring, that they actually have an optical brightener in there. They appear quite bright, and the idea is this helps you track it when you're playing a game. Mini toys. So did I bring my alien? Yes, I brought my alien. So mini toys actually have these things inside of there to just make them more visually pleasing. One of the other ones, light sticks that I'm going to show you. Light sticks are based off of fluorescence. So when you crack them, so when you take them and you crack them, you hear this kind of glass breaking. What's happening is two sets of chemicals are mixing. Those chemicals emit the equivalent of ultraviolet light, and then inside of there's fluorescent molecules, and they grab onto that ultraviolet light and glow. So the whole basis of light sticks is in fluorescence. And so these ones, I've never cracked them. You can see the glass tube in there, but when I put them next to a black light, they're going to glow. One of the other things that we've seen how they use fluorescent lights is in ID cards. And one of the ideas is they put fluorescent inks inside of there, basically to make it more difficult to counterfeit. And so most ID cards, I'm going to show you my my driver's license, that there's actually, in mine, there's a picture of myself in ultraviolet ink, and my date of birth is on the side in ultraviolet ink. So I don't know if you guys get that pleasure yet, but when you go and you buy something and they card you, they take your driver's license, and one of the things they do is put it under a black light and look at it and see the fluorescent ink that's under there. So some other ones are like inside of a $20 and $100 bill, they put a little fluorescent ink in there, and they use this for counterfeiting. One of the other things, so mostly I am an organic chemist, so mostly what I show you are organic molecules, but minerals, certain minerals fluoresce. So it's a different process, but it's the same idea. It's going to absorb ultraviolet light and turn it into visible light, but a lot of minerals actually fluoresce. And so I have a collection of rocks. This is kind of my favorite one. It's got a mineral called worksite. So I don't know if you can see it too well. It's got kind of a yellowish color. That's the mineral inside of this rock that it's going to glow under a black light. And so this kind of, the interesting thing is you can have I have a huge collection that I did. It weighs a ton. So you guys just get my favorite rock. This is the one, this is the kind of the showpiece rock that glows the best. But it's part of geology too, the fluorescence. All right, so what I wanted to do now, and this might be a little tricky, is I'm going to turn on my black light. I'm going to show you guys some of these things, and hopefully it will glow quite nice. So I have to turn out my light and turn on my black light. And we will see how well these things glow. We want that. And we want this, like that. And then you guys get a kind of a table view here. I'm going to put you on the table. Hopefully it will stretch. Yes. So this is kind of unexplored territory for me. So still kind of bright, but you should be able to see it. And we got our black light, which I always think is cool. Looks like a lightsaber. Can't go wrong with that. But let's take a look at some of these things I was talking about. So the first one is the fluorescent orange. So I was wondering how well it would turn out, but you can kind of see that it's very glowing. And in comparison to like my hand, let me grab something that doesn't fluoresce, but pretty much everything does. What doesn't fluoresce? All right, this book, when you look at it, it kind of looks kind of like a dull color. It's not really glowing. So when you put this in comparison to this, you can see that it's glowing quite brightly. So that's the idea. What it's doing is it's taking the ultraviolet light and turning it into visible light. So when you compare it to the book's not fluorescing, and this looks like it has a light being shown on it. It's not. It's emitting its own light. So when you look in the book and behind it, it is quite brighter than that. Some of the other things, so like this guy, which I love, is probably one of my more favorite toys. A lot of the toys that I have are fluorescent, and this is one of the joys of being a chemist is I get paid to go into toy stores and pick up fluorescent toys that I've learned to be able to pick out because they tend to be very unusually bright. Like tennis balls too. So tennis balls have fluorescent dyes inside of them, so they tend to glow or they tend to appear unusually bright. And so this is the reason why is they have fluorescent dyes inside of there. So once again, when you look at it in comparison to the book that's not fluorescing, it glows quite readily. So the light sticks, so you can see that they're glowing too. You can see the different colors. So you know how the different colors of the light sticks kind of vary. The idea is that what it's doing is there's different types of ink. So there's different molecules that fluoresce different colors. So you can see like this one's red and this one's orange. And if I was to crack them, that's what they would glow. But I haven't cracked them. And they still will glow under a black light. So remember the reaction inside of there, all it's doing is producing a chemical equivalent of ultraviolet light. So I'm kind of providing that to them. So would we have the cloth here? Remember, that's something else we told. And you notice this is very kind of particular. It kind of has a very, bluish color. You can see that. So we want the blue color to mix with the yellows that are inside of the cotton to get rid of that. So you can see it kind of glows a little bit. And same thing when we look at paper. Paper is actually very fluorescent, so it's a very bright color. So when we look at it compared to the book, we can see that it glows, and it's kind of, there we go, it kind of has a bluish color. That's the idea, is we want the blue color to mix with the yellow tones that are inside of the paper itself, and that is going to allow it to look very, very white. So what's some of the other ones? So, and like I said, we have plenty of toys. So I got the little alien. This is one of my favorite, but it like fluoresces. So many of the toys actually fluoresce. That $100 bill's got a little strip down it. So my personal favorite, I love this one. So we have the rock, and then when we shine the light on it, it glows. So it fluoresces quite well. And what I love is that it looks like it's kind of a piece of charcoal that, it's glowing in that sense. And so you can see that there's there we go. That only part of it is glowing. So that's where the mineral's at. And there's other, pieces of rock that do not fluoresce inside of there. So this is this is actually, I admit, most rocks do not fluoresce that particularly well. They will put out a color. So there's some that are green and some that are red, but this one in particular is just, I don't know, it's easily my favorite. So, and that, like I said, that you can see that there's some pieces that glow and some pieces do not. And then the last one, like I said, I always love this, this is probably one of my favorites, this guy. So my toy. So unfortunately, once again, I always prefer to do this live, but if when I do it, you take a picture of it, you can see how by spinning it, it kind of confuses the camera. And when you take pictures of it, it looks really spectacular. It's like a blur of color when you take a picture of it. So this is one of my favorite toys. But once again, it's just a toy that they put a bunch of fluorescent inks in to make it look fluorescent, just to make it more visually pleasing. So that's what I have. So I usually have a lot more, but it's COVID, so I couldn't lug it all home. Let me get my light back on. But that's the idea. So all I really understood was fluorescence, which is, some molecules grab onto ultraviolet light and turn it into visible light. And that was really the only concept that we used. And from there, we were able to explain why some colors are brighter than others. Why is paper super white and why is white clothing super white? How they use it for counterfeiting, how black light sticks work, and things like that. So, and then I forgot about what. So let's see if it kind of shows up. It glows. So this is one of my other favorite ones. So the other thing that people tend to think about when they hear the word chemistry is they tend to think very bad or kind of artificial or poisonous. So there are many fluorescent molecules that are actually natural. So what I'm showing here, this is a bottle of tonic water. So you're able to go and buy this at the store. They use it as a mixer for a drink called a gin and tonic. And tonic water has a molecule called quinine. So quinine is just an organic molecule, and it glows kind of a basic blue color. And actually, quinine was the first molecule that chemists studied fluorescence with. And this is what's nice is some of the molecules, like the ones they use in the paper, are based off of quinine. So they're actually not harmful to the environment. They're quite natural. So this is the idea. You can go and buy this from just any store. It's very natural. And then it's, there's nothing dangerous about it. You can drink it and it is absolutely okay. So you understand all of these different ideas with just a basic understanding of chemistry. And like I said, in my book, I go through and talk about, I think it's over 100 different similar ideas where I explain the basic chemistry, and I go through and I talk about, what's their effect inside of everyday life. So, yeah. So like I said, with this, I kind of warn people that once I start talking, I have a hard time stopping. I would love to entertain questions or anything like that. And this is mainly what I like doing. And I love it when people ask me whatever question they want about chemistry, and it doesn't matter how crazy it might sound. That's where the interesting part is.
How are the molecules of different fluorescent colors different?
So once again, it comes down to the conjugation. So I can either have a little bit or a lot. And then there's other things called chromophores. So mostly in organic chemistry, it has to do with carbon, and the backbone has to be carbons bonded to themselves. So when I talk about conjugation, it's carbon doubly bonded to itself in a row. That's the base conjugation. But then if I add an oxygen or a nitrogen to it, it's called a chromophore because it interacts with the carbon and causes a different effect. So just in different combinations. And the idea is ultraviolet light is kind of a narrow range inside of our visible spectrum, but inside of our visible spectrum, that's quite wide. So we go from, red to purple and all the colors in between. Every one of those have a specific amount, a specific wavelength and a specific amount of energy. So by changing the structure of the molecule, we can control how much energy the ultraviolet light loses. So ultraviolet light is high energy. That's why it can give you a sunburn and it's really bad for you. We take the ultraviolet light that's high energy and then we reduce the amount of energy that light has, and then it gets back into the visible spectrum. So I can control how much energy it loses by controlling the molecule that's doing the absorbing. And there's actually, fluorescence is another huge idea in biotechnology, that they attach fluorescent molecules onto DNA and proteins so that they're easy to see. And there's literally a whole company that I visited one time. That's all they do is make fluorescent molecules and make variations to try to be able to change the wavelength to give variation inside of the molecules. So it's actually a huge business beyond, paper and cloth, that it's part of the biotech. And that's what they do, is they try to combine different orders of carbon and oxygen and nitrogen to see what kind of wavelength they get out during fluorescence.
Carrie asks, is the amount of UV light required to make the fluorescent molecules react and visibly glow enough to cause UV damage?
So there's actually two different types of ultraviolet light. So they tend to group ultraviolet light all together. So ultraviolet means, ultra means it's beyond the visible wavelength. So I think it gets to purple and then purple and then violet, and then you get to ultraviolet, which is beyond violet. We start getting into light that you can't see in the visible spectrum. That's what they mean by ultraviolet. So in the ultraviolet region, for chemists, there's actually two different pieces. There's the ultraviolet you get just past the visible, and then there's some that's deeper. So there's actually two different types of ultraviolet light. One is relatively safe. I mean, you're not supposed to look at it in your eye for too long or things like that, but it won't really burn you. The other ultraviolet light is the stuff that will give you a sunburn. So what they do, if you've ever seen a tanning lotion, so material that's supposed to help you get a tan, it actually blocks out the bad ultraviolet and lets the good ultraviolet through. So you get the ultraviolet to develop a tan, but you don't get the ultraviolet to burn. So the black light and most of what's inside of ambient light, so inside artificial light, it barely gets past the visible spectrum. So you can sit under a fluorescent lamp bulb for 2 days and you're never going to get a sunburn. However, outside, you can tell, and this is part of why people think, they say ultraviolet light you can tell that it's not natural. Well, because it lacks that certain edge of the high energy ultraviolet that you have outside. So yeah, and that's the idea. So that when I use my black light, it's perfectly safe. So I didn't bring it, but at my lab, we use the high energy ultraviolet light, and some molecules, so some of the rock species that I have only glow under that particular type of light. And so we're able to put it out, but that stuff, it's dangerous. And one time I left it on, so it's a little lamp about this big. I left it on and I put it on a table, and I was on there for about an hour. I didn't realize that I left it on. And then when I pulled it off, there was a big kind of block bleached out. It was bleached white from the ultraviolet, high energy ultraviolet light being sitting there. And that's kind of what happens if you've ever seen something, if you leave it outside in in daylight, it becomes bleached, and that's because of the high energy ultraviolet light is actually destroying the fluorescent molecules. So when you leave, like a piece of paper outside that has color printing on it, over time it will become completely white, and that's because the high energy ultraviolet light is going in and destroying the molecules that are inside of there, so it no longer has color.
So Jake, correct me if this is not your question, but he asks, if fluorescent material is easy to produce, why has it become a popular method to differentiate counterfeit bills and IDs?
Oh, so it's easy to produce, but the idea is it's hard to produce it in different colors. So like I could grab onto, like today, I could go grab onto a bunch of paper and grind it up and extract out the fluorescent molecules. But the idea is that to be able to get it in different colors is actually really hard. So when I looked at that counterfeit, the counterfeit ID, the picture itself was glowing blue. So it's very easy to get that blue color, but to get the brown and the flesh tones and it had it in green, that's very difficult. And also knowing the US Treasury Department, they probably have a unique molecule that does the glowing. So that glow is a very kind of warm green color that's actually very difficult to make in itself. So they probably have that locked down, and it's probably part of a trade secret, just like the paper and the ink that they put into the bills. They keep that under lock and key in terms of what's the exact combination. So that's, when I looked at that counterfeit ID, that's where they lost it, is they couldn't get that green color and they couldn't get the brown color. That's really hard to get. And so they just went with the blue. So the blue was easy to get. It's in a lot of different things, but the different colors are kind of hard to get. They're hard to process, and then it's hard to print it out onto something and then cover it over with regular ink. So they're just making the overall printing process more difficult, more hoops to jump through. So I'm sure, so like they did have a fluorescent piece on that fake ID, but it wasn't complex enough.
Aaliyah is asking, why do glow sticks stop glowing or become dull over time? Is there an extra compound that stops them from glowing for a long period of time?
Yeah, so it's a chemical reaction. So it's like anything else. It's like gas inside of a car. Once I crack it, the reaction starts, but the reaction uses up molecules in order to do this. When it goes from the reactants to the products, and the products emit ultraviolet light, I'm using up the reactants. So over time, we use up the reactants, and after a while, the amount of reactants sort of disappear. So it's like gas inside of a tank of a car. If I run the car long enough, eventually the gas will run out. So what's fun is you can actually affect the reaction, and this is something that you kind of do in a demo. If you crack a light stick and then if you put it in something cold, the reaction slows down, so the glow actually decreases. And then if you put it into boiling water, the reaction increases, and then the light stick starts glowing a lot more.
Marcus asks, why are things fluorescent?
So once again, it's with the inorganic stuff, like the rocks, I have to admit, I don't really understand that particular point so much. But it once again, it comes down to the structure of the organic molecules that are inside of there. And so this is what you get to learn. As an organic chemist, this is what I learned, is to be able to look at these structures of organic molecules and understand the underlying effect that they have, that I can look at it and look at the combination of carbons and nitrogens and say, oh, it's going to have this conjugation and it's going to have this glow. The other interesting part of organic chemistry is we have the ability to build things that, this is how a lot of these fluorescent molecules come from, is chemists build the molecules from very simple molecules. We add things together. So it's like building a castle out of Lego bricks. You kind of add the bricks on each other and build something complex. And because we're building it, it's very easy to substitute one thing for another. So if I'm building a castle out of, say, white Lego bricks, it would be very easy for me to put a red one or a blue one inside of there. So that's one of the things that we do as organic chemists is we build these fluorescent molecules. And then as we're building them, we have the ability to variate them. And as you variate them, you start getting different effects.
Carrie is wondering, are things that are labeled neon, neon colors, lights, etc., just fluorescent, or is there actually a different compound acting there?
So that's a very good question. So I have done extensive research on this, and neon means fluorescent. So it is called neon. It's just a term that they use that means it glows very brightly. So if you ever seen, they have like neon gummies, they actually fluoresce. They have a fluorescent compound inside of there. But the idea of the neon, when you look at them, they have that unusual brightness. And whenever you see that unusual brightness, 9 times out of 10 that they're fluorescent. And then the way that you check is you put it under a black eye. So yeah, neon like clothing and neon food, they've typically put some kind of fluorescent molecule inside of there. So they mean the same thing. And I think it gets to the idea that if you call something fluorescent, that doesn't sound nearly as appetizing as neon.
Why do things like absorb light or not absorb light?
Okay, it's part of the chemical structure. So when we, as an organic chemist, we are able to understand the structure of molecules. So literally when it comes through, oh, I got it backwards. 1 second. There we go. That's what I decided. So it depends on the structure of the molecule. So the idea is we as chemists understand how the molecules put together. So carbons and nitrogens and hydrogens being bonded together. There's different ways that we can combine those things. And in those different combinations, they give different molecules property. So what we're looking for in this case is called conjugation. So there's a lot of carbon bonded to itself is called a double bond. And if you put a lot of those in the row, they tend to have an effect with ultraviolet light. So like quinine itself, the one that I showed you, had a lot of conjugation inside of there. If I don't have this conjugation where things are attached with multiple bonds to themselves, it doesn't glow. So, and you can kind of look, and it's actually, I'm writing about it. If you showed me a molecule, I could look at it and predict on whether or not it would glow under a black light or not, and be pretty correct most of the time.
So I think that wraps up our question and answer session for today.